morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I have no idea when you're all going to watch this video, so I thought I'd cover all the bases. We're glad to have you joining us. If you are joining us on Sunday evening, Dave may be doing two roles. You may watch him on camera, and he may also be typing. We recorded this during the week. We wanted to have a time to put our thoughts together, put some content down, and bring it to you. And so if at any point through this conversation, whenever you are watching it, we'd love to hear from you. But specifically, if you're watching this on Sunday night, drop a question, leave a comment. Dave would love to have a conversation with you. You could even set up a meeting. But here's the deal. I'm doing a lot of announcements right out of the gate. We wanted to have a conversation today about hurts, challenges, obstacles that we face. Dave preached last Sunday and really looked at what do we do in the midst of the hurts and the obstacles and the challenges, because we know they're going to come. We know we're going to go through them. And one of the biblical words we're reminded of is to persevere. And so if you're in a season where you're hurt, if you're in a season of being wounded, we know today will not fix everything. We know that we're not going to jump into a conversation and kind of wave the pastoral wand and all your hurts are going to go away. We know that, but we want to be able to offer some encouragement. We want to be able to offer some things that maybe you're going through that would help you on the way. I don't know about you, Dave, but I have noticed a massive increase in meetings. We have seen, it seems like this last 20 months has put people through the ringer in ways that they may never have before. And so you do a lot of pastoral care, you take a lot of those meetings, maybe as much or more than anybody. What are you seeing from people? What are you hearing from them? What's kind of the lay of the land right now?
Just so much heaviness. It seems like most meetings that I have are having to do with some sort of hurt that a person is facing. There's a lot pertaining to celebrate recovery. People are processing how they're going to get back on the right track in their own lives, moving in the right direction in their own lives when the world is going perhaps in a totally opposite direction. And so the added tension and stress from that, so many pastoral care meetings of people just not even necessarily just events that bring on grief, be it the death of a family member or the loss of a job or all these things to do with vaccinations and the stresses that has brought on people. But a lot of people coming in just really frustrated and angry and can't even necessarily articulate why. But it's just a culmination. It seems especially like, yes, the last 20 months as a whole, but even the last 4 or 5, it just seems like it's swelling, especially right now, ironically, as we enter the holidays.
And I don't know what you find, but a lot of times we have meetings with you, a lot of times we sit down with these conversations. I'm not even sure they want answers.
No, right.
I think a lot of times when you guys come to meet with us and have a conversation, sometimes you just want a safe place, or sometimes you just want to be heard. You just want to have these conversations. And so may this be kind of a pastoral conversation with you today. If you couldn't get a meeting or didn't want to have a meeting, maybe we're just going to kind of slide into your home for the next 35 minutes or so. And we know this isn't going to fix everything. We know that. But maybe this encourages you. And so primarily Dave's got some things he wants to share. I'll kind of jump in where I can. But I know we didn't script a prayer in here, but I feel led to pray. I feel led to pray for those who are watching whenever they're watching. And then, Dave, why don't you share some things for them? But let me just kind of pray for those who are tuning in right now. Heavenly Father, we come before you today, and our heart goes out to all those who are hurting. Lord, this has been such an incredible season we've been in. It's been incredibly challenging and difficult. It seems like people are hurting in ways maybe they've never hurt before, or it's been confusing them in what they're feeling and processing, the setbacks and the obstacles. God, would you grant hope today? Would you grant some insights, maybe just a little bit of wisdom for how they can persevere in the midst of the hurt? And so, God, at this time, at this season, may you speak through Dave today and speak to each one who's watching. And we ask this in your name. Amen. What do you got for them, Dave?
Well, what I have in my mind right away is where the idea of this recording was birthed from. So a year and a half ago in August of 2020, back when we were just starting to exit the most strict pandemic restrictions, we had a community memorial service at the church on a Sunday night for anyone who had lost a family member, because there were a lot. We lost a lot of people from this church in like a 5-week span, and no one had the ability to grieve together because it was in the height of the restrictions. And we knew there was just value in being together And so we had that sort of thing in mind going into this season, but there didn't seem to be as many cases of people suffering loss without being able to be together. That's more of a thing. But just a heart for, well, people are hurting in some really significant ways. And what I find, as I'm sure you do as well, when we're fortunate to sit with you, and it's an honor. Even if we don't know what to say half the time, it is an honor to be able to sit and help you process grief and pain. Sometimes there are things that I want to be able to say that are on the tip of my tongue, and I just don't dare say it because I don't want to be insensitive. I don't want it to fall on deaf ears because I know when I'm hurting, if someone starts rolling out the advice train, I'm not ready for it. I have no interest in it. I just want to be heard. I don't, like you alluded to, I don't really want answers. So I just want to kind of unpack 3 core things that I believe we all need when we're hurting in order to have some sort of hope through that. I believe the first one, we need to have support in our lives. And none of these are going to be so like, shock and amazement, but sometimes things that we tend to forget or perhaps move away from. You need people in your corner, but I think that starts in our lives by naming the season that you're in. If you are hurting, you just have to admit it. And sometimes people like to dance around it. Sometimes we have a hard time being honest with it. But if you're in a season of pain, don't suppress it.
I feel like that's gonna be challenging for people watching. I find Southwest Nova people are kind of gritty and tough.
Yes.
I don't know how many homes you and I've been in where you speak to the person grieving, you speak to the person who's going through a massive challenge in their life, and you kind of want to ask, how are you doing? And their answer is always, I'm doing okay. I'm all right.
Always.
And I think there's a toughness to our people down here that I think your point is right to name it, but I think they're going to want to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time.
Absolutely. And if you need a positive spin on that, because sometimes we can take that as weakness, it's actually the ability to let yourself off the hook, which we all want when we're in seasons of pain. There's no need to be ashamed. If you're hurting, it's actually probably more destructive to just try to tough it out, because often when we try to bury and suppress our pain, which we love to do when we say, I'm okay, I'm hanging in there, that sort of language, really that's just us suppressing it. And what it does at that point, you can hold it down for a little bit, but it'll start popping up unhealthily in other parts of our lives. And that's when it can become problematic. But another thing that I hear all the time as people are grieving is sometimes we are tempted to minimize our grief compared to someone else's. Like someone might come into my office and say, well, I'm having a really hard time with this, but I know it's not as bad as what so-and-so is going through. I almost want to cut people off right in that moment and say, please don't minimize what you're going through. Because at that point, when we do that, it kind of adds an unhelpful layer of shame of, well, what's wrong with me where I'm grieving over this thing when so-and-so seems to be doing better and they're having a worse situation. That's never the point in grief. That's never something we should look at.
And because we're in a small town, everyone thinks they know what everyone's doing. But boy, do not judge what you think someone's doing on the outside or in the public for how they're doing on the inside. And I think for us to watch someone's kind of highlight reel, well, they're struggling and they're doing just fine. Be careful. What you see on the outside may not be what's going on the inside. So I don't mean this in the wrong way, but worry about your pain. Worry about what you're feeling. Don't worry about how somebody else is growing and progressing through it. But I think there's a lot of, well, look at them over there. They look fine. That may not be true.
I've fallen suspect to that numerous times, of having a meeting or two with the person who's grieving, and then for whatever reason they might be able to put on a really good facade of, okay, I'm fixed, I'm in good shape again. And sometimes I've missed that and assumed too much, only to find out a little later that so-and-so was really still working through it, just hiding it really well. And it's not like, I get it. I get it. If I'm going through a really heavy season in my life, by my nature, I don't want to dwell on it. I'm not the type of person to ask for help, if that's something that many of you probably resonate with. But, like, to our own peril, I think a lot of the time we have to be willing instead to just put it out there. At the very least, welcome to the human camp.
Well, the other phrase I was thinking about as you were saying that, letting people in, How many times do people hear say, I hate to bother you, but could I chat?
Yes.
I hate to bother you, Pastor.
Please bother me.
Well, and I think there's this part of that toughness and grit down here of like, I'm not hurting, I'm okay, but maybe I have to chat. Sorry to bother you if you're not too busy. Just be you. Like, just let people want to serve you. People want to help. And so to be able to have a few people to support you and be able to name what you're actually going through, I think is very powerful.
Well, and that enables us to stop suffering in silence, which we are so prone to do in an age. You talked about our lack of community, our aloneness a couple of weeks ago when you preached. There is no shame whatsoever in asking for help. And sometimes I actually think that's a really safe first step for people. If you don't know where to turn, if you know that you're having a really hard time, but you can't quite articulate it, maybe it's helpful to start with a counselor or a pastor, because at least at that point you know that you're going to a confidential source where you can just kind of unload, and maybe that person can listen and help you pinpoint a little bit more what it actually is.
You don't want them posting it on Facebook?
I mean, you can, but no, don't.
Because I think there's a generation that would suffer in silence, and then there's a generation who would suffer publicly. Yeah. And I think the danger of over course correcting is putting everything on social media. Yes. And I think there was a generation that wouldn't let anybody in, and the younger generation would almost let everybody in. I think both are dangerous.
I know there have been times in my life, even pre-social media, where I've been prone to want too many voices for varying reasons, but then it just gets cloudy and unhelpful because I can't process every single angle that a person might be offering me. The one, and I don't want to say disadvantage, but sometimes people think it's enough to just talk to a counselor or a pastor. I would say that's a great place to start, or maybe a place to kind of take another step in your grief. But at the same time, a lot of those relationships are more professional in nature. Yeah. You need to be able, if you are hurting on a significant level, even just to ask God, like, would you show me a couple of people in my life who I know I need to take the risk, because there's always risk involved, I'm convinced. But to be willing to take the risk, to trust them with what is hurting, you need friends. Yeah. You need family members, someone who care about you outside of a professional setting. It's huge.
Well, usually when they book a meeting with me to talk about stuff, one of my action items is, do you have 1, 2, or 3? I don't usually go beyond 3. Mm-hmm. Like 1, 2, or 3 people that you could sit down with. I often call them my 3 a.m. friends. Yeah. That no matter what you're going through, they're there for you. Yeah. You will serve, and people will serve, but who are your in the trenches people? Everyone needs a couple.
Yeah. And it's amazing how you say those 3 a.m. friends, and all of a sudden people pop to my mind right away. That's such a great way to put it. Yeah. Those probably aren't people that you've just met.
No.
Those probably aren't necessarily your social media friends. No. But yeah, I love that distinction. And even sometimes there are, this might be predictable for us to say, but there are groups in this community, and not even just in the church, but it seems we have a lot of groups of people that are popping up that maybe you just need to be in a setting that is specifically about grief or the thing that you are struggling with, so that at the very least, even if you don't feel comfortable sharing, you can hear people go around the room and say, here's what I'm going through, and you can nod and think, oh, I understand them, therefore they might understand me.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of some men right now. I know you probably go on to point 2 here soon. But some of the men maybe need to go to a shed. Yes. Maybe you go to a wood pile, and I think there's a lot of men at times who, I'm not talking about my feelings, and I'd beg to differ. You will. You just need a hammer in your hand. Yeah. You need to go to a wood pile. You need to get a saw. There's something about tasks and conversations that I think often help men get chatting. It's not that men won't do a coffee and chat, but I think sitting down saying, hey, go, tell me what you're feeling, Dave. Versus shared mission or shared tasks, and then conversations kind of comes up. So men, I'm thinking of you right now. Don't say you don't talk. It's get in the truck and go for a drive. Get in the truck and head down to the wharf. Watch conversations start to come up.
The golf course, same thing. Like I have numerous conversations in all those spots. Yeah. So when it comes to having some hope in your hurt, you need support. You need people like who is there with you. The next thing is you need sustenance. you need some sort of substance for yourself. What's going to fill you in your hurt? Because a lot of times, I think when we go through grief, like as I alluded to on Sunday, my appetite is the first thing to go. So literally, my physical self is going to start suffering when I'm grieving or when I'm stressed. But not just that. I think a lot of times we don't. I guess we just get so off kilter and kind of just roll on autopilot as far as the things that we should be doing in life that are healthy. But what does fill you? What needs to fill us when we're grieving? And it's God's presence all the way.
And when we're grieving, I promise you, if you're grieving, you'll be tempted to turn to the shallow things.
Yes.
The shadow things. The amount of people that will talk about grieving and losing motivation, binge watching too much media, zoning out, things that you think I'm just relaxing. It feels that way, but it's shadow. It's shallow. It's not real. And so, it could be, I talked about putting on music a couple sermons ago.
Yes.
Worship music sustains and is substance and fills. Good food with good friends.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes, it's true.
I know they think, well, pastor's going to say, Bob, reading and prayer.
Yeah.
Well, sure. But there's a lot of other things that God gave us and gifted us in the body that fill the soul. I know my wife loves the beach. When life's getting a little too hard, take the kids, leave me alone for a little bit. I'm just going to go walk with the Lord on the beach.
Nice.
But somebody else might go sit in town at a coffee shop. Like, I think we need to be okay saying, I'm filled differently than you're filled.
Yes.
And I'm wired differently than you're wired.
Well, and even as it pertains to reading the Bible and praying, that's going to look different for people
Absolutely,
too. That's like, prayer isn't necessarily like this on your knees by your bedside. Sometimes people, you're talking about men going for a drive, sometimes people pray at their best when they're driving.
Totally.
Or for others, it's falling asleep as they pray. Others, it's waking up early to pray. Reading your Bible, some people prefer to listen. Others would prefer to sit in that same chair with that same coffee at the same hour with the same slippers and just dig in over and over, where others would rather just see how much of the word they can take in.
Totally.
But whatever it is, we need to have that deeper level stuff, because grief pushes us. It's our way of pushing back. Really what it is. It's our way of fighting for ourselves. I know for me, there probably the most important moments for me when I'm grieving, when I'm stressed, are moments of stillness where I don't need to be anything. I have to be alone. I can't even be home. I can't be in the same building as my family, because at that point there's a chance that I might be needed to be husband or dad. I can't do it here at work, because at that point I have to be pastor.
Right.
I need to be somewhere else where I can just be Dave and allow God to speak to me, allow myself to have a conversation with him in my soul. And I need that stillness. Now, maybe everyone's a little different.
Well, as you're saying that, I want to go into community.
Oh, okay.
Like, I'm so wired. Where are my good people? Because I'm external. I'm external processor.
Yes. Which I am not at all.
Right. But part of going through or finding hope in the hurt is, one, knowing what you need, but letting the other people have what they need. We are so quick to project, well, if I want to be extroverted, then you better be extroverted.
Yes.
And sometimes we'll go visit a friend who's going through a season. Well, come on, get out of the house. Come on, let's go do something. Well, that's only helpful if getting out and doing something is part of how God wired them to be sustained, to be fulfilled. So we need to know what we need, but recognize what the other person needs, so we're not projecting onto them and actually maybe damaging them worse.
So that's interesting, because Job comes to my mind when everything fell apart. The fact that he had his buddies come and before they started going off the rails, just sit with him. How long did they sit? Quite a while.
Chapters and chapters and chapters.
Right. Like, they just sat, and before they even started talking, just in silence. That's something that would fill my soul. I feel like you'd be bored in about 45
Say
seconds.
something, Dave.
Yeah.
So
know yourself.
Know yourself,
Yes. And I would venture that connecting with God when we're hurting isn't so different than connecting with God when we're well.
Totally.
I don't think that shifts just because something in our lives has. So it's about paying attention to how he operates in your life. But one thing I really want to push on is the importance of having God's word in
Yeah.
your life in this season, because that's got to replace the narrative.
Totally.
We speak things into our own lives and over ourselves that often are not true when we're grieving, because we can't really think straight, because our perception is skewed. And so maybe you need 3 or 4 verses in your life, and if nothing else, you can Google right now, Bible verses about pain, Bible verses about suffering, Bible verses about stress. Pick 3 or 4 that you resonate with and speak those over your life.
Totally.
Commit them to memory, or put it as the home screen on your phone or something. Something that you can turn to that is true and rights the ship a bit in your more stressful moments when you feel like you might be going off the rails a bit. And for others, it could just be, maybe you just need that constant, I hear people say all the time, like, I just talk with God all day, which is not me at all. I'd have a really hard time being in that frame of mind. But some people, they would just love to have scripture playing in the background in their office or in their home all day. However, God can fill your soul and point your thoughts in a right and true direction. I think that's so vital.
And if you go back to your first point, if you have the good people around you, even in your hurt, get them to hold you accountable. That you're doing the good things that keep you sustained. And so if they know you well enough, these two should fit together.
Well, I have a thought that's totally unrelated as far as accountability and stuff goes, but yes. Because I might get off to a flying start with some of these things, but my own discipline isn't necessarily so strong in those ways a lot of the time. And what it also does when we are going to these deeper layers is it pushes out the noise. It pushes out the stuff that just isn't going to be helpful in our lives. And I think the last thing, not to rush ahead too much, when it comes to hope as we're hurting, you've got to have people who support you. You've got to have sustenance. You've got to have something that's filling you. But I think we also need steps as well, because the amount of times where I have been hurting over something in my life and I've just laid there staring at the ceiling thinking, now what do I do? I hate that feeling. And I think we all get that in some way, shape, or form. But I think there are things that we can take action on, because I would rather, once I'm done maybe sitting and lamenting, and if I'm being honest, having my own pity party, I want to get up and I want to do something that even if it can't fix it, it's going to push me in the right direction.
And that could come from failures of any kind.
Yes.
Really. Like, I know when we think of hurts, we often think of someone dying or a loss of a loved one, but there are lots of hurts and challenges and obstacles we go through that aren't about loss. There's a lot of people who fail at something and lay back and think, well, I'm not going to move forward. So it could come in a lot of different directions.
And we have a hard time articulating that sometimes, because often those are more internal than external.
And I wonder sometimes if we think we almost have to pay penitence or something, like, I messed up, I put myself in this position, so I should kind of go off the radar for a while. I should sit out for a while until God's pleased with me to let me back in kind of his game, so to speak, versus jumping right back in. What's my next step? And I remember I don't know what funeral it was. I preached a funeral a couple of years ago, and the 23rd Psalm jumped out to me in a whole new way, where the psalmist says, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And when you say steps, it does not say, I went into the valley of the shadow of death and bought a house and moved in and took residence in the valley. He took me through the valley. And so when you say steps, that always jumps in my head of whatever you're going through, whatever hurt, challenge, or obstacle you're up against, keep the feet moving. Keep moving. God wants to walk with you. He's not going to make you stay there forever. He redeems and reconciles and makes new. And so I don't want to take over your thing, but the steps is so crucial. They're not the same for everybody. Like, no, none of this is the same for everybody.
But I actually want to throw that back to you again for a second, because as we were talking about this, one of the things we established that needs to be true for everyone, regardless of what you're hurting in, there's got to be good pacing. And when you talk about going through that valley, when we're hurting, I think we'd rather go in one of two directions. We'd rather stop and not move and stay there forever, or we'd rather sprint through it. And both can be just as damaging.
Well, he leads us through.
Yes.
Like he leads us to greener pastures. He leads us through the valley. And I'm wired to want to sprint through it. And I know lots of people who would rather just sit down and kind of wallow, and I get that. But yeah, it's God is leading us through the valley.
Mm-hmm.
The valley is going to teach us something. Like we're going to learn.
Always.
You talked in your sermon about the purpose in the pain.
Yes.
And boy, we want to get out of the pain so fast. Yesterday, get me out and get me out quickly. But letting him lead and guide and set the pacing, that will also ensure that we don't go through at a speed that warps us.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's good, he's our Father. He'll do it in a way that's protective and it has a purpose. But boy, trusting and discerning again, it goes back to the body. I need 2 or 3 people to help speak into me, to help remind me of what God's doing, because I'll tend to build him around my narrative.
And it's good to have those people because it is such a learned thing.
Totally.
Because if you're not in a season where you're hurting right now and you're thinking, okay, like the next time I go through this, I'm going to pace myself.
Yeah.
It's really easy to say when life is a little more smooth right now.
Yeah.
But I think common to all of us is we do want to deviate one way or another, and it's hard to be consistent. And so I'm thankful that God leads us.
Well, and one of the things I think God will gift us in the season of pacing, this is where the old saints come in.
Yes.
This is where, when we talk and preach about Paul needing a Timothy and Timothy needing a Paul, and we talk about mentoring, which we've done for years here, people in their 30s do not need more people in their 30s around them at some of these times.
Right.
When you're up against the wall, or your career's just getting started, or you're being challenged, or young kids, I mean, those are challenges too, or loss of a loved one. I need people, I think you do too, who have a different perspective. Having somebody who's late 50s or 60s that can look into my life and say, young man, this is but a blip. This is but momentary. I remember when I walked through my season or my dark night of the soul, when they can do it with perspective, that is so rich, because I will tell myself that I'm special, I'm unique, nobody has suffered like me.
I do the same thing, yeah.
And they'll speak and say, I went through the exact same thing, young man, and I'm still here, and here's what I learned, and here's what God was good. We need the intergenerations to speak into each other.
And maybe if you're watching this and you are in that older generation, I hope that's a source of fulfillment.
I know.
Of validating your journey, validating your struggle, especially because sometimes we might come through, if you're in that older generation and you're looking back, chances are you had a hard time in your struggles as well. And if you're like me, you tend to beat yourself up for that a little bit. Know that it still matters, because what you have learned, you can share with someone else. And I hope I know, like, even at only 32, the amount of times that I've been able to look at someone, not nearly as much, and say, I've been in a similar spot, even that brief flicker in retrospect makes it so worth it. Yeah. Even if I didn't love the difficult season in the moment.
Yeah. Even to know that your pain had purpose to helping the next generation.
Yes.
Maybe you couldn't find, like, what was the purpose of my suffering? What was the purpose of my divorce? What was the purpose of that person dying? Well, don't bury the pain. Use that as a teaching point for the younger generation, and that will give it purpose. All these treasures and libraries walking around our church, these human encyclopedias of victories, and it's just, it's so rich. And people, you need to let your story out. You need to let people in. You need to speak out of your joys and your pain.
I've alluded to this, but I love sitting with people in their living rooms and hearing, and sometimes they don't even know that I'm soaking in what they're saying, but big time. And so maybe if you're my age and you don't have anyone in your life, or at least you haven't leaned into someone who is in your life, but you haven't had this type of conversation with them, man, don't negate the importance of it. Yeah. You and I have chatted a lot about how people tend to make sometimes rash decisions in grief as one of those ways of trying to hurry through. What are some things that you would encourage people to avoid in that way?
Any big decisions.
Yeah.
Don't sell the house. Don't buy the house. Don't leave the marriage. Don't sell your kids. I think there's a natural reaction when the hurt and the challenge and the pressure is coming down to want to kind of pull the emergency zip cord, right? Yes. Like, I'm just going to pull it and off we go. Yeah. I think that's when you go back to the good disciplines. good food, good people, walks on the beach. Go back to that. But what we will be tempted to do is pull the ripcord.
Yes.
And want to do something dramatic. Every counselor I've ever talked to will say the same thing. Keep people from doing something dramatic. Don't sign that lease. Don't sell that car. Like, just wait. And some will say, for how long? 6 months to a year. Just hold tight.
Yeah.
Just hold tight. That'd be my biggest thing, is don't do something dramatic.
Well, and what I think we as people often don't realize when we want to make those rash decisions is it's just distraction,
right?
For the most part. It's just taking our eyes off of the thing that's right in front of us and putting another thing right in front of us instead. And sometimes they might be connected, but it's just not helpful, because all it does is just push that pain down the line. And really, I think the longer it goes down the line, the bigger it becomes, the more clouded it becomes. And if we're making a lot of unwise decisions, it gets more complicated. Better to just be still.
Hold tight.
And
it's because
breathe.
you can't control the pain. So you try to control something. And people who couldn't control someone passing away, well, I can control selling this house. Or I can control this. I understand that. Hold tight. We're probably going to land the plane here in the next few minutes.
Yeah.
What would be some of your sending words? You probably have the most meetings of anybody with people who are hurting by nature of being the community pastor. You oversee CR. You're involved in that. If you were going to send a word of hope to 30 people instead of having 30 meetings, what would be kind of your sending word to people who need a word of hope right now?
First of all, anyone, if that's you, my heart goes out to you sincerely. And I want you to know that there is so much value in just sharing your soul of what's going on. You don't have to be apologetic. If you feel like you're still stuck in a rut and you just haven't been able to move past it and that's still where you are, then that is still where you are. Own that. Don't nullify that. And find someone who at the very least you know is a good listener. They don't necessarily need to have answers, but the value of having someone listen of what's going on in our lives is critical at any juncture in grief. And I find it, because again, I know people say they don't want to be a burden. I know I'm not alone in that. I find it a great honor to listen to people who are hurting, and I know that as a pastor, I'm not the only person who feels that way. But also know that God is not wasting this. He is developing something in you that even though you would rather be done the thing already, even though you would rather have no reason to watch this, I look forward to the moment where, not necessarily knowing what's going on in your life right now, you and I get to have a conversation of here's what was happening in my life in this moment that I hated, and here's what I know that God has done since, not just for my situation, but in my life. That's growth on the journey. That's one of the most beautiful things in life, I am convinced. It's, how are diamonds made again? Where do they come from?
All the pressure.
There it is. So, it's not to Disney it up too much or anything like that, but it's just, it even right now is valuable.
Yeah. We care for you guys. We love you. We appreciate you. As I had one sending word, it would be the don't hurt alone. Don't keep that to yourself. You don't have to tell us, but talk to somebody. Get it out there, process it, have someone praying with you, lifting up your arms. And if you don't have somebody, we'd happily walk with you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to email, it's dave@yarmouthwc.com, or leave a comment in the comment section. And if we can serve you in any way, it would be our pleasure. Have a great day.
Bless you guys.